afternoon again, dear esteemed friends, honored representatives of civil society organizations, media, academia, dear colleagues, students, and everyone. Welcome today to this event organized by forumZFD in Kosovo. I'm Besa Luci, I'm the chief editor of Kosovo 2.0, and it is my great pleasure to be hosting and moderating today's discussions. We are gathered here to mark two interconnected anniversaries: the 25th anniversary of the end of the war in Kosovo and the subsequent establishment of forumZFD in Kosovo. This quarter-century milestone is significant and should not be overlooked or simply passed by. And as I reflected on how best to characterize the importance of this moment, I was reminded of a saying I had heard and referenced some time ago, and I will be quoting. "Peace is not just the absence of war, it is the presence of justice," end quote. The presence of justice, access to justice, and commitment to justice should be imperative in Kosovo and in the wider region, particularly within the processes of dealing with the past and transitional justice. That is because 25 years later, the legacies of the war across the region remain pertinent, unresolved, and consequently divisive. Within increasingly polarizing and revisionist narratives, significant challenges persist, including unprosecuted war criminals, denial of established war crimes, and insufficient political will to acknowledge past wrongs, to name a few. While these issues are crucial, it's important to recognize that justice encompasses much more than just prosecutions. It also involves ensuring the right to know, the right to be heard, and the right to have spaces for dialogue that promote healing. That is why, at its core, transitional justice should be about improving the lives of citizens. Over the past 25 years, I believe this has been at the heart of the Forum's work, as an organization dedicated to addressing the deep-rooted consequences of war and promoting justice and dialogue. From conducting programs focused on reconciliation and social healing, advocating for victims' rights, providing platforms for marginalized voices, to designing community-based projects that address trauma, forumZFD's work is not limited to academic or policy debates. It engages with citizens, institutions, and civil society to ensure that peace is not only achieved, but also sustained. However, while citizens must be at the center of efforts related to dealing with the past and transitional justice, they should not bear or be assigned the burden. The responsibilities and commitments particularly lie with state, institutional, and international actors. Today, we have gathered to reflect on the roles of these various actors and processes to date. On this occasion, forumZFD is also launching a report titled 25 Years After, Dealing with the Past in Kosovo, which I truly believe provides insightful analysis for this purpose. And today, together, we will aim to learn from the past, but also critically assess the present and the future. Now, I would like to start by inviting Mr. Nehari Shari, the forumZFD Kosovo Country Director, for his remarks. Thank you.
Mr. Ambassador Rohte, dear colleagues, friends, representatives of international missions in Kosovo, academia, and students. On behalf of forumZFD, I'm honored to welcome you to today's event promoting the research paper 25 years after dealing with the past in Kosovo. Professor Bieber, together with Donika and Marina, are going to tell us more about the current situation, the challenges, as well as opportunities and recommendations about dealing with the past in Kosovo. But the question is, why deal with the past? For us working in this field, we often get the question like, why do you have to focus on past? Why don't you just focus on future, better future? Well, unfortunately, past, present, and future are not as divided as one would think or hope. The events of the past do affect the present, and then altogether, they do have an impact on the future. If you look at the 90s, the war in Kosovo, 1998-99, or the other wars in ex-Yugoslavia, of course, they do have the dimensions of political, social, economical, and other dimensions. But what should not be neglected is also the role that not dealing with the past, for example, of Second World War or the periods before that, played in the events of the 90s. And have we learned our lessons? Well, we are witnesses that not only in Kosovo, but in all the region, public discourses are dominated by nationalist and ethnocentric narratives about the wars, glorifications. Collective memory is being shaped by victimization, neglect, denial, prejudices, polarization, some of them also mentioned by Besa. Therefore, one could conclude that not really. We have not learned the lessons, and scholars would even argue that these patterns do not contribute to better future being established. The last 25 years, Kosovo went through different post-conflict processes, phases, and important political processes. However, what needs to be highlighted is that besides the political level processes, also the social level is very important and crucial. And one could say that the dialogue between these two levels was not existing, or it was not in a very satisfactory level. An example, mentioned also earlier, I did, from last night. Together with one of our partners, forumZFD, we did promotion of a publication, Unheard Voices, which consists stories of men men survivors of wartime sexual violence. It took 25 years to come up with this publication. So it's been 25 years since the survivors had the traumatic event, and those narratives have not been and are not being discussed still today or dealt in a broader level. They remain marginalized, social stigma is there, or what was mentioned yesterday, there is in cases with men, it's even double stigma. And it was also highlighted that the main support that this group is getting is actually from CSOs, from civil society organizations, and that there is lack of, besides reparations, in some cases, there is lack of institutional support needed. As Besa mentioned, 25 years has a significance also for forumZFD. 25 years ago, the head office at the time in Bonn, now in Cologne, started the first project office ever abroad, and this was forumZFD Kosovo. And now, 25 years after, we are present in 13 countries in the Western Balkans, Middle East, as well as Southeast Asia. In Kosovo, the main focus is dealing with the past, which is approached holistically, where besides the consequences of the war to individuals, we do tackle also the societal level, or as we refer, the social wounds. Together with our partners, we are implementing diverse interdisciplinary projects covering topics such as missing persons, wartime sexual violence, peace education, memory and memorialization, youth activism, civil conflict-sensitive journalism, organizing researches, publications, exhibitions for the sake of documenting and contributing to knowledge production. And I will not keep it longer, but I just want to use the opportunity to thank our partners, without whom all the work that we have done the last 25 years would not be possible, as well as other actors active in the field of dealing with the past. And not to forget also to thank the continuous support of the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, not only for this event, but for forumZFD in Kosovo and in the Western Balkans when it comes to dealing with the past. Thank you.
Now it is my pleasure to welcome the German ambassador to Kosovo, His Excellency Johan Rohde, to deliver his opening remarks.
Dear friends, distinguished guests, dear authors, it's truly a pleasure to be with you today. Looking around, I see many familiar faces, people I had the privilege to work alongside, and those who have been on the front line of the work we're here to discuss, dealing with the past in Kosovo. We are here to dive into the thoughtful research presented by Florian Bieber, Marina Vulović, and Donika Emini. Their paper is more than just an academic exercise. It's also a reality check. It shows us where we've come in the 25 past years and where we still need to go. And what better way to reflect on this by also celebrate forumZFD's valuable work during these years. Dealing with the past, as we all know, is not a process with a finish line. It's a journey, or one that sometimes feels long and challenging, but absolutely necessary. transitional justice is about the right to know, access to reparations, and the work of transitional justice, memorialization, and promoting youth engagement is not just about looking back. It's about building the foundation for a shared future. And I think, dealing with the past is also not allowing people in inclusive ways, not allowing people using wrong narratives and using as a weapon, as we can often see. The Kosovo government adopted a transitional justice strategy recently. That is very commendable. But we remain concerned that the principle of an inclusive and victim-centered approach has not been fully reflected throughout that strategy. We share the criticism of EU and civil society that the strategy mainly focuses on victims of the majority community. As the paper reminds us, there's still a lot of work to be done. The absence, for example, of a compensation fund for all war victims, for example, as demanded by the Kosovo Specialist Chambers, and in the EU Progress Report, it is mentioned this is key that Kosovo assesses this inequality of treatment. And the need to address the atrocities of all communities equally are gaps that need attention. Without these steps, reconciliation remains incomplete. My country too has faced a similar past. As we approach 80 years since the end of World War II, we continue to reflect on our past. The process, I would say, never stops, which each generation it grows, evolves, and challenges us to do better. What we've seen in Kosovo is that dealing with the past isn't just about strategies or policies. It's about people like all of us who are here today, who have the courage to face the truth and help their communities heal. And this is where forumZFD has made an incredible impact. Over the past 25 years, they have kept this dialogue alive together with others, supporting peace-building efforts and helped ensure that every story, every loss is acknowledged. But let's be honest, this journey is far from over. We still face obstacles. But I want and tend to be very optimistic. Because why? Because I believe in the power of dialogue and the strength of civil society in a democratic Kosovo, and in the commitment of all of you and also of your international partners pushing forward. Together we can assure that the lessons of the past help us shape a future of peace, justice, and inclusion for Kosovo. And with the incredible work of forumZFD and other partners, I have no doubt that we will get there. Before I close, I also want to do allow me to do some personal remarks. My last post, I feel sometimes like a flashback. My last posting was Sri Lanka, which had 3 civil wars, where sometimes it was even difficult to bring NGOs together at the same table. And the UN, the EU, we established Office for Missing Persons. And I think it's very important, this effort is a marathon and governments change. And I think it's important that we keep up, because if we allow the past to be a prison, there will always be malign actors to use that. And I said it also this morning, if you don't deal with the past, I also served 2 years in Japan, then the not dealing with it is always used as a weapon by interested parties against you, as we see in the China-Japan relation, or also in the toxic relations sometimes between Japan and Korea. So you have to deal with it, and I find the study very commendable. It's a good work to start, and I think all actors who are active in dealing with the past and in interacting with the government, keep up the good work, and you have the full support of my government, as also shown by the support of our development ministry. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Now we will proceed to the presentation and discussion of the report that they're all mentioning. So I would kindly invite Florian Bieber and Donika Emini to join the discussion, the panel here. The third author of the report, Marina Vulović, is trying to connect online. If it doesn't work, we're going to continue just with the two of you. So as we've already heard, today on the 25th anniversary of the establishment of forumZFD office in Kosovo. Today is the 25th anniversary, and there's also this report, a truly insightful report that looks at the trajectories of the past 25 years when it comes to dealing with the past and transitional justice in Kosovo, but not just that, also offers recommendations and ways out of certain situations. Before we begin, I would please allow me to introduce also our speakers. Florian Bieber, who is a professor of Southeast European history and politics and director of the Center for Southeast European Studies at the University of Graz, Austria. I believe majority of us are aware of his work, important work and important voice. Mr. Bieber has extensively researched and written on nationalism, ethnic conflict, the rise of authoritarianism in the Western Balkans, and EU integration for the region. The second author of the report is Marina Vulović, postdoctoral researcher at Chair of International Relations at the University of Potsdam, Germany. Ms. Vulović works and publishes on political developments in the Western Balkans, Kosovo-Serbia relations, EU enlargement, and strategies of EU and non-EU actors in the Balkans, as well as nationalism and populism. And the third author is Ms. Donika Emini, the executive director of Civicos Platform, a consortium of 300 civil society organizations in Kosovo. She's a scholar of international relations, and her expertise include EU global conflict management, focusing on the EU-facilitated dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia, and security cooperation between the EU and the Western Balkans. Thank you to the three of you, the two of you who are joining physically, and Marina, thank you for making the time to join us online. I will pass the floor to you to do a presentation of the report, and then we'll slowly dissect through it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for this opportunity. I will kick us off with a bit of a background, where then Donika will pick up with some of the kind of core findings, and Marina will share some of the policy recommendations which we've drafted with you. Just to start out with, I mean, the quarter century since the end of the war is a good moment to take stock. It's a generational span where you have a new generation, 25 years old now, who have no memory of the war, no personal memory of the war. So it's a good time to kind of look back. I mean, I was also thinking in the discussions, the ambassador was reflecting on the history of Germany, where this 25 years after the Second World War in Germany, we are talking about the 1960s, the late 1960s, when critical debates began in Germany, really, about what happened during the war. These debates, of course, have been ongoing in Kosovo and across the region throughout the last 25 years. This is not the beginning, but there's been a long journey already, which allowed us to look back on. But let me kind of set what I think are the key background elements. Now, the first one is that dealing with the past is dealing with the present. And this makes dealing with the past a particular challenge in Kosovo as well as elsewhere, because it's not just about dealing with something which happened a quarter of a century ago, but it has profound contemporary relevance. From discussions of relations with Serbia, the dialogue, as it's often called, to other elements of regional relations, but also in other countries of the region, talking about the past means talking about the present. Relations, whether it's inter-ethnic relations, whether it is political claims. So it is not just about a past-oriented process, but one which is very much dominated by the present. And that makes actually this dialogue harder, because it's not just about memory, it's not just about acknowledging responsibilities or hearing the voices of victims, but it's also about claim-making on the present. And that, in fact, makes this process more difficult. And we'll talk more about the dialogue in particular, and how this whole process of dealing with the past and the dialogue is a very complicated and challenging relationship. The second point I would like to make is that it's not just about justice. A lot of the discussions about dealing with the past have focused on justice and on courts. While this is an important element, it's not the only one. And in fact, courts are often ill-placed of dealing with the past, because they identify those who are perpetrators, but they don't help always to give voice to the victims. They don't help to bring about narratives, shared narratives, or multiple narratives on the past. And they also don't help to deal with one element which we haven't mentioned, which wasn't mentioned in the introduction, but dealing with the past also means preventing a reoccurrence of the violence in the future. And, you know, as we've seen, we're here just on the anniversary of the most serious incident of violence in Kosovo for well over a decade, is a reminder that the reoccurrence remains not just a pious topic, but one of very acute relevance, and one which also increases the urgency of dealing with the past, because if we don't deal with the past, the risk of reoccurrence remains relevant and acute. The third point I would like to make in the background is that this is an inherently regional topic. Our paper is focused on Kosovo because the 25th anniversary of the end of the war is a specific event for the history of Kosovo. It is one there where we're very much aware and we acknowledge that dealing with the past cannot happen in isolation in one country. It cannot happen just in Kosovo without also happening in Serbia, but also happening in the other countries of the region which were part of the wars of the 1990s. So it should not serve as an excuse to say, let's wait for the others to do the dealing with the past, but it just means that these are interrelated processes. So to find an adequate way means both a domestic process as well as a process which is regional, which is trans-border, and which covers the entire area. The fourth point I would like to make is that the dealing with the past is not just about those who were victims or perpetrators during the war a quarter of a century ago. It's also about those who are born afterwards. And this is very important because often textbooks and media promote a very one-sided narrative of what happened 25 years ago. And I'm not singling out Kosovo here, but I'm speaking of the larger regional picture. And it's a societal phenomenon, not just of those who suffered themselves, who were part of the wars, but their children and the next generation, who often actually have often more closed and a more nationalist and a more narrow view because they themselves did not experience the war and did not experience the many shades of gray which occur in war and the complexities. So it is in a certain way an intergenerational project, not just one which might end when that generation who was at war is in a certain way has dealt with it, but also the next generation. This is I very much agree with the ambassador's comment on this is an ongoing process. It's not one which one ever reaches and says now we're done. And I think we see this in countries in Europe where still the legacy of World War II and the reoccurrence which we experience in some countries of Europe of radical, nationalist, exclusionary movements remind us that this is a never-ending process and one where we can never believe that we're done with it. We can believe that we've gone a long way, but there's never a point of a finish line. The final points I would like to make before handing over to Donika is that it is sometimes tempting to say, let's just forget the past and deal with the present or the future. And I think it's a trap to believe that one can do that. First of all, those who are victims or traumatized often don't or cannot forget, or the forgetting is a traumatic forgetting, not one which is actually helping them to move on in their lives. But I think this also applies to society at large, also in relations, in inter-ethnic relations and other relations, this past becomes and remains present. A colleague wrote in a different country of the post-Yugoslav space how the war is ever present, but it's a nationalist, narrow narrative which remains present, and that actually is not helpful for dealing with the past. So dealing with the past needs to be done, if otherwise the past will be there, but in a very unhealthy and unhelpful way for societies. So in that sense, we cannot just claim that we just look forward if we don't deal with it, because it imposes itself on society otherwise. And this also means that what we are very strongly arguing for is that dealing with the past does not result in a single narrative of the truth. It brings about and gives space for multiple ways of looking at the past. Now, this does not mean the past is completely free from facts. We're not asking for, or we're not arguing for a post-truth dealing with the past. But dealing with the past means there are established facts, but how to interpret them and how to fit individual experiences into that has to acknowledge multiple perspectives. It has to acknowledge that people have different ways of thinking about these events, and dealing with the past, it means giving space for these different voices. These are, I think, the pillars of the process. And as we show, and as Donika will share with us now, a lot has been moved by different actors in this last quarter of the century. But there is, I think, a good moment to think about in which direction should the next years go to, in a certain way, move this process forward.
Thanks a lot, Florian. Good afternoon. I'm very happy to be here. I've been working in the past in reconciliation processes, writing papers, trying to draw comparisons between the French and German reconciliation process and then German-Polish reconciliation process, and trying to bring all these models in the Western Balkans. But this exercise, this paper has been very important because it looks at the case of Kosovo, almost detached from the regional perspective or from bilateral issues. It looks at what can we do? I mean, how do we move on from here? And I think it's a very, very good momentum because we are talking about the 25th anniversary of the end of the war, but also the forumZFD anniversary, but the fact that this year we adopted a strategy, national strategy for transitional justice, a document which is obviously based on the interviews I had with some of you even sitting here. It's flawed. It's not perfect, but it's a good starting point. It's a good starting point in getting local ownership in the process, which was, historically in the past 25 years, mostly driven by the international community. I mean, dealing with the past, reconciliation as concepts, they have been introduced to us immediately after the war. And it was always seen as an external project. It was externally driven, mostly by donors, and that's why we have a lot of, civil society organizations which have been absorbing these funds and, trying to work on the ground, which have done amazing work and continue to do an amazing job. But, the 25 years, we had multiple governments trying to come up with a piece of paper which would be the strategy on dealing with the past. I'm saying it's externally driven because the first efforts to actually draft this strategy, and you know this better than I do, it was in the framework of the ICO and supervised independence. Basically it was a requirement. We had to do this, tick the box, move forward, and then obviously because it wasn't organically driven from us, the group got dissolved almost immediately, although it was multi-stakeholder group, and then restart this in 2011, and then get lost in somewhere in some government's drawer, and then finally to have a strategy this year. So in the past 25 years, the biggest problem, which also will remain probably in the future if we don't address it properly, is the politicization of the process. This process has been linked to faces, not political parties, not regimes, but specific faces, leaders wanting to take ownership and sort of use it, in most of the cases, even for political gains, turning it into elections topic which shouldn't have been. This belongs to society. It should be institutionalized, but not politicized. And I think this is also the risk now with the new strategy, as pointed out by the people I have been talking to, that it's a process which is politicized, and it might depend on the will of one certain government, and if potentially there is changes, everything could go even down the drain, and potentially. And then there is the same is with the fate of the Truth Commission, which was an initiative, although quite inclusive, initiated back then by President Taci. And in the past 3 years, we didn't see actually the president of Kosovo, the current president of Kosovo, even talking about it informally, saying, look, there is a process, it's halfway through. We will internal informal meetings amongst each other, and then once we have legal basis to actually revitalize it, we will do it together. This decision came only like this month, earlier this month. We had to revise the paper last minute in order to add this update, and we still don't know how it's going to look like. I mean, who is supporting the working group in the background, and is it going to be continuing, or is it going to have the fate of other institutions or mechanisms, starting from scratch, because we don't like to inherit from previous political elites. And the same was with the war crime institutes. We have now the War Crime Institute. There is and in our interview, we talked about the previous one, which wasn't really effective. It didn't do a lot of good job, but there is still something to inherit from it, and then we'll see what is the role. I mean, is it just going to serve as documentation platform to then be used with Kosovo's even ambitions to sue Serbia for genocide? I mean, this was also in the public discourse in the past, at least 3 years with the current government, although it has been also in the past. So this is the politicization part, which has been quite detrimental in the past, and it could be in the future. The second one is polarization, and then there are two layers. The one that is obviously happening inside in Kosovo, because we clearly see divisions between the opposition and the government, all different actors on how to sort of deal with this issue. And then there is the polarization that is ongoing with Serbia, because it was very difficult for us as authors to actually see Kosovo completely detached from the dynamics in Serbia, even in Bosnia and Herzegovina, sometimes in Montenegro. So there are regional dynamics that actually define this. In this polarization framework is also the Brussels dialogue, which in my opinion shouldn't have even included dealing with the past, because obviously the Brussels dump is just becoming bigger and bigger, throwing issues between Kosovo and Serbia, while Brussels is really mandate, but also political capital to actually deal with it is shrinking. And it makes it feel almost like everything depends on that process. It makes it part of this transactional approach in which you do this, I do that, and then it makes it even more a topic of polarization internally. And then the third one is very important, because we have been talking about who contributes more, and it's about the approach. Because of course, as Florian said, it was solely focusing on the justice pillar. So most of the dealing with the past has been okay, UNMIC, EULEX, ICTY, special court, some local courts. And then it felt like almost it was never a process we could actually control, because it was hybrid, it was always shared. And obviously it's also limited, because, it has a specific threshold on how much can you actually achieve with just dealing with justice without other pillars. And that's when actually, I have to salute all the work of civil society and experts and academia here who have been doing the work for the rest of the pillars, dealing with, the rest of the pillars that the institutions couldn't. But then CSOs have, certain limitations. They are not in the decision making. It's very difficult also to work in a polarized environment, which, has been made even more difficult by both governments, even, Serbia and Kosovo. So these are basically, this is a very good opportunity, because I see also partners from the Serbian community here, which, could actually be included in this debate. There have been a lot of reactions from the civil society actors about this strategy, but I think it's a very, very good starting point. And it's also a very good thing, because we not only still have space to talk about this, but we still have, courage from civil society to actually criticize a process that hasn't been done properly. So by debating now and onwards, we can contribute to making that strategy better, its implementation better, and also pave the way for the next strategy, which could have been, more inclusive, not only in time frame wise, but also in including all relevant actors to contribute to it. Thanks.
Marina, we try to connect online. As I mentioned earlier, the internet connection might be suffering a bit, so I will pass the word to you, and we will test it.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me at least, if you can't see me?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm very sad that I couldn't be there in person, but I'm currently on maternity leave, so that prevented me from traveling. But I'm very happy actually to be here online. So I hope this hybrid format also due to the bad internet connection, will work. So based on the main findings that my colleagues have presented and kind of the contextualization within a wider regional framework, we have in the paper issued a set of 3 recommendations for each of the most important actors that are involved in the process of dealing with the past. And that is the Kosovo government, CSOs, so civil society organizations that have really been at the forefront of driving this process, as well as the European Union and the international community. So when it comes to the Kosovo government, the first recommendation that we issue, and really connects to what Donika was saying, that changing the polarizing narrative into one that acknowledges multiple perspectives and fosters a positive atmosphere between various communities, primarily between the Serb and the Albanian community, is really essential. And so depoliticizing this public narrative could result in a more inclusive process for all communities. This also relates to the transitional justice strategy that was mentioned, and I'll come back to that in a second. So the second recommendation that we issue for the government is that it should invest some more or heavier political capital into establishing the Association of Serb Majority Municipalities, which could bring the bridge the divide between communities. This institutional division happens to be kind of going on alongside a discursive perpetuation of division that we currently witness. So kind of working really genuinely on establishing these lacking institutional capacities in Serb majority municipalities would bridge this community divide and help in fostering reconciliation. And the third one, and this relates to the first that I've really mentioned, the politicization of the narrative and polarization, is that implementing the governance strategy on transitional justice and reconciliation needs to happen through engaging various stakeholders. So this does not just relate to expanding it from a kind of ownership of it just by the Prime Minister's office to include other institutions in the government, but also extra-institutionally through involving civil society actors and the international community. And with the transitional justice strategy, even though we acknowledge that it's a very good starting point, there are obviously issues with it, by excluding, of course, certain years such as 2004 from the time frame that the strategy covers. It really has this danger of painting a one-sided narrative and presenting the majority community kind of as this main victim, and that obviously doesn't reflect this multipolarity and multiperspectivity that the strategy aims to achieve. So now I'll move on to the recommendations for the civil society organizations in Kosovo. The first recommendation that we issue is that obviously civil society groups should persist in their efforts to foster reconciliation because, as mentioned, they have been at the forefront of this process and mainly focusing on tracks 2 and 3 diplomacy. This includes not only CSOs from, the Albanian communities, the Serb communities in Kosovo, but also other non-majority communities in Kosovo, as well as organizations in Serbia and at the regional level. So as was already mentioned before, this regional approach is really essential. The second recommendation for the CSOs is that they should systematically hold the government accountable for implementing the government strategy on transitional justice and advocate for an inclusive approach throughout the process. And this really relates to what I was saying before, to kind of enable the adoption of the strategy, taking into account this multi-perspective approach to it. The third one, and this is kind of ties again with the regional approach that was mentioned before, efforts should be intensified to revitalize regional initiatives on dealing with the past, such as RECCO, and sustain these initiatives amid the challenging environment. And obviously one platform where that can be done is the Berlin process. With the support of the European Union, even though, of course, the Berlin process is not an ideal platform and has been kind of known for lacking in following up on specific initiatives and recommendations, is still serves as the only regional platform, really, where these issues can be raised. And because, of course, there's this kind of quid pro quo logic in dealing with the past and reconciliation on a regional level, so meaning that one country will only deal with the past or want to kind of work on reconciliation if the other country does the same, it's very, very important that, we can only achieve effectively dealing with the past and reconciliation if we look at it as a holistic process and at the regional level. Apropos Berlin process and the EU, when it comes to the recommendations for the EU and the international community, obviously addressing issues related to dealing with the past as an integral part of the Belgrade-Prishtina dialogue should be continued, even though we, of course, are aware that the process or the dialogue can be overloaded with many different topics that cover societal issues, not only kind of the status issue and political issues, but there have been specific initiatives such as the Declaration on Missing Persons that was part of the dialogue. So what the EU should do is support faster implementation of agreements in Kosovo and exert, of course, more pressure on Serbia to collaborate. We've seen only as a result of this declaration of missing persons, the repatriation of remains of 2 victims from Kosovo to Serbia, but we really haven't seen much engagement on Serbia on this. So there needs to be a push to do this from the EU side. And related to this, the EU should also invest more significant political influence in wielding a breakthrough in the Belgrade-Prishtina dialogue, and especially when it comes to focusing on issues of dealing with the past. The dialogue has been recognized by our respondents as one of the main challenges to dealing with the past and reconciliation, but at the same time as kind of having this greatest potential to actually achieve a breakthrough in improving these relations. So even though there's much to be criticized about the Belgrade-Prishtina dialogue and the way it's been led in the last few years, really there hasn't been much of a dialogue anyway. Or there hasn't been really implementation of what has been agreed on in 2023, which has more or less derailed the dialogue since then. It's still important to kind of highlight that this is a unique platform that exists and that should be used. Additionally, because dealing with the past in Kosovo has been a lot overshadowed by, of course, trying to finalize the status of Kosovo. And so political issues have overshadowed other societal issues and processes, such as dealing with the past. Achieving the recognition of Kosovo by the 5 non-recognizer states in the EU would be essential. So it would kind of close this political status of Kosovo and would allow Kosovo to move on from this discussion and focus on other societally pressing issues, such as dealing with the past and reconciliation, and also for it to be able to do that on equal footing with Serbia as well. And then thirdly and lastly, when it comes to money, of course, that's a big topic, and the EU and the international community should adopt a more organized and strategic approach to allocating financial aid and outlining objectives related to dealing with the past and reconciliation, as well as financially support the implementation of the strategy for transitional justice that was mentioned, which would, of course, aid this process. And one way to achieve this would be through the newly announced growth plan. Even though good neighborly relations and fostering reconciliation is mentioned there, the only issue that really pertains to it in the growth plan is connectivity. So that's kind of highlighted as one of the main ways of how, through the growth plan, reconciliation can be achieved. And of course, building bridges and building railroads is probably a very good thing, and connecting people is a very good thing. The conditionality attached to the growth plan when it comes to issues of dealing with the past should be much more pronounced, because, of course, the financial incentive is huge. And so for the regional governments to tackle this issue, the growth plan would serve as another way to maybe through conditionality achieve progress on specific issues. Let's say like really revitalizing this RECOM initiative as part of the Berlin process. So those would be the recommendations, and I really look forward to the discussion and to your questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We will be continuing now with a question, the Q&A, before we also open it up to the public for your questions. And I would like to start with you, Florian, and maybe to talk a bit about the place of dealing with the past within the bigger political frameworks. Because I feel like Donika mentioned something a bit earlier, made me think that she said, now at this point, should we just be throwing everything on top of the dialogue? Well, of course, on the other hand, there's those that would make the claim, well, the dialogue from the start should have been structured as such to take into account issues of dealing with the past and transitional justice, and unfortunately it has not, so that moment has passed. But still, I think a lot of people would make the argument that it's important to link it more sufficiently, dealing with the past with these broader political processes, be it the dialogue or the Berlin process, because on the other hand, if we don't, what we see is also the dialogue is becoming more of an obstacle. It's becoming the place from which these polarizing narratives are actually coming from. So could you speak a bit to this? How do you see, how can we, should we, and in what ways should we, should dealing with the past be prioritized within these ongoing political negotiations, and particularly the role that EU member states, EU leaders should take in this regard, because they pressure on results, but then they also sideline justice and accountability in favor of political expediency. So to comment a bit on these dynamics. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think we would argue that the current dialogue, I mean, first of all, it's not a dialogue. It's not a dialogue. It's neither a dialogue nor is it achieving what it's supposed to achieve, which is normal, which I would consider to be good relations between Serbia and Kosovo, and within Kosovo between the Serb community and the majority community. Neither of that is happening through the dialogue. In fact, all of that has been getting worse. So this would suggest that currently dealing with the past into the current dialogue is not helpful, because I think, as we were also highlighting, the risk is that then dealing with the past becomes part of the negotiation. And that, of course, is not the purpose. I mean, dealing with the past is not a bargaining. You know, you give me one victim, I give you one victim. This should not be the way it operates. But again, this is a larger problem of the dialogue, which is not working. We would argue that we need a completely new process between the two countries, which first of all, there are many elements beyond dealing with the past which it would need to do. Be transparent, be clear who is not delivering, which it isn't, with the EU being transparent in what is agreed and what is not agreed, by whom, when, what, to allow not the abuse and the blame game we're seeing. And then it has to grow roots, because if the dialogue is about two, not just leaders, but countries and societies living next to each other, then that has also include, societal dialogue, which in fact leaders have been stopping, have been actually against. And the EU has also been against in many ways, because it's easier to deal with two guys than to deal with many actors who have multiple different wishes. But dealing with the past has to be inclusive, as the dialogue. So a new dialogue needs to be inclusive, needs to bring in, civil society, needs to bring in the Serb community, needs to bring in the Serbian society, needs to bring in the Kosovo society at large. And then dealing with the past has an integral place, because at the end of the day, Serbia and Kosovo cannot live next to each other as good neighbors if the past is not dealt with. So in that sense, there is an inherent part for that, but it requires a complete reset, not just a new special representative, but a complete rethinking of this process. Will it be successful with the current leadership? I'm not overly optimistic, but at least one has to conceptualize it differently. And the same goes for the Berlin process, which you also asked about. The Berlin process is a flawed process in many ways, because it's for different reasons than the dialogue. But it's the only place where there is a regular dialogue between not just the political leaders, but also societal institutions, civil society across all of the Western Balkans. And because it's the only format which exists, it should be used for dealing with the past, because we talked about this regional approach. I mean, RECOM was one of the initiatives which was the most meaningful civil society initiatives to deal with the past. And, again, this regional framework has to be the Berlin process, because there is no other, no matter how much it might be flawed.
If I might just connect here quickly before I move to Donika with the case of RECOM, it was back in 2018 when the EU, for example, removed it from the agenda based on the premise that there wasn't also intergovernmental support to in the London summit. So that's why I was also asking you or I would like to extend the question. You're arguing for a reshift and a rework of the dialogue that places dealing with the past differently within these structures. The 10th anniversary of the Berlin process is coming up. It's going to be in Berlin. Can we expect a shift in this regard? I mean, I do think in a lot of ways, you mentioned something that is very positive, that is the only place where all these actors come together and talk, but it hasn't really produced such. I think 2018 was kind of a reminder of that. What do we expect on this 10th anniversary of what to expect of the Berlin process?
To be honest, not much in this regard, because this has not been made a priority. Other issues have been made priorities, economic integration. I think the problem of the Berlin process is exactly that, because there are different countries hosting it. There's been a sense of every country tries to grasp a success. And a success in dealing with the past you don't get in a 1 year or half a year cycle. It's a long-term investment. So they're going for things which are easy, not which are hard but important. And this is why I think dealing with the past has been often on the margins, or just you tick a box. This is why I'm very much aware of the limitations of the Berlin process. What I do expect is that this 10th anniversary is taken more seriously by the German government as something which they're trying to help with the institutionalization, or kind of making sure there's a more follow-up. But I fear that this kind of annual cycle of every new country hosting it and having their own priorities will risk further postponing dealing with the past, because no single government is going to achieve a breakthrough in that. But again, we have initiatives like RICO and other ones where you can say, well, maybe it's not about dealing with the past, but setting some institutions in motion. What about some regional textbook commission, or some regional other initiative which can bring fruits down the road, which is at least kicked off at this Berlin process. But I don't expect it to happen at this summit, I'm afraid.
Donika, I would like to connect with you about the recent national strategy for dealing with the past in the introduction, and also introduction of the report. You talked about the fact that there's risks, but there's also opportunities, and where there's the first time that we have such a comprehensive strategy, because there have been previous attempts and there's been previous ones in the past, but one government has started, it ceased to exist, it was forgotten, a new government came, they tried to do their own documents, so it's been an ongoing kind of saga, if I may say, in that regard. So there's that, but there's also the same story with the Truth and Reconciliation Committee, as you mentioned. In today's context, I would like if you can speak also about the opportunities they provide, these two instruments for dealing with the past, but also more specifically, how can we ensure that they don't suffer the same fate as all the previous documents before? We're on the verge of elections. We still don't know who's going to be in the next government composition. Yes, this strategy is linked very much to the Prime Minister. Assuming he gets a second mandate, he might have an interest to continue with it. But how to truly make sure that it's not sidelined, stalled, similar to previous instruments?
Unfortunately, we can't. That would be the short answer, but there is like a longer version of this. Like, as I said before, it's local ownership. I think this means a lot. Finally, we are having it on paper. It's institutionalized. It's there. The actors. Is it ambitious? Who needs to take over what kind of, implementation sets of activities? How much civil society can contribute to it? How much can we just, monitor it and see the implementation of it, and then, try to either, flag the challenges, the failures, and really try to start a debate about the next one. I mean, strategies are, documents are not set in stone. We can always, re-strategize. So I think this is a good starting point. And this, also applies to our colleagues here from civil society, because I guess all eyes are on you and then on us to actually, make sure that it's being implemented, and it's implemented in the right way, and it's not politicized. And I think this is where we should actually try to not let happen politicization and link to a specific political figure, be it Prime Minister or the President of Kosovo. I mean, yes, political will in the Balkans is important, because oftentimes, I also work on the strategy for cooperation between civil society and the government. And it's like all based on bureaucracy and administration. But sometimes you need the minister to be there to say like, we are moving this forward. So political will is important. Politicization is not. You know, like everything, it seems like everything is gravitating through, you know, towards the Prime Minister's office. And then whenever there was, you know, a discussion, you know, in Brussels about this, you know, then Lajčák would be like, oh, nothing will be transparent, nothing will be, you know, agreed until everything is agreed. And then we could see that they are talking about the missing persons, but then, you know, like nothing was being transparent. So I think this is a tormenting exercise for all of us who have gone through it. So I think, you know, we should be all cautious about this. And then also the President's office, again, I'm saying this, you know, a lot could have been done in 3 years. You don't have to institutionalize it, formalize it. You could do it like informally. They could have been having meetings and to send signals that the president is the president of all, and she's there, you know, for all people, to hold that, you know, debate on, to keep it on going until, you know, the legal basis would have been provided for the document to be for the commission to actually be revitalized. So that's why I'm saying it's good that it's there, because we can hold something accountable, but we should keep an eye on the next one and what we can do better. Civil society could have activities that are beyond that strategy in order to send signal to the government that this should have been done and we are doing this.
I just want to connect with you on that, because I know that also one of the criticisms actually towards, another criticism towards the strategy is also from civil society organizations themselves, that they were not included as much or consulted within that process. And I find that kind of ironic, because if there's been somebody that's truly been working on issues of dealing with the past over the past 25 years, it has been civil society organizations, it has been researchers, it has been activists, also people in academia. So most of the knowledge and most of the documenting and the collection is actually in the hands of civil society, and they are excluded. And could you just speak about the dangers that also brings and brings forth? So when civil society is excluded, you risk losing. Although you mentioned it, that memory that exists, and I think it's something very important to be expanded and highlighted.
As I said before, like most of the pillars beyond, you know, those, even the justice ones, you know, obviously there are a lot of organizations actually helping, you know, even court cases, ongoing court cases. But, you know, like the 3 pillars have been like mostly led by civil society, working with the community. There is a lot of documentation, there is a lot of expertise, there is a lot of memory. And, you know, most of the CSOs that I have interviewed, and I'm not talking about the Serbian ones, because those have been interviewed by Marina, and we have, you know, already known that they have, you know, difficulties with the way that the process has been, you know, led, and the lack of inclusive approach. But I have also witnessed many Albanian, Kosovo Albanian CSOs who have basically protested and opted out of the process because they thought it's unfair and they didn't want to have to do with it, because they weren't agreeing on, you know, many approach of the government. I think it is what I have found out during this period is that we don't have a common narrative about the war in Kosovo. And, you know, like talking about having the common narrative with Serbia or other countries in the region is already like too ambitious. Like we don't have one in Kosovo. There is not, you know, like even the government opposition dialogue hasn't happened as it should have. And then, you know, civil society was almost completely left out of the process. And this is dangerous because first, by including more, you give ownership to multiple actors. This is a very complex process. This needs, you know, like it's a work in progress. Like I was working on German-Polish reconciliation process, you would still see Poles not happy with many things. So many years after, you know, like it is exhausting, and the government cannot claim that they know everything, they do things better, and, you know, keep it completely isolated from the rest, because, you know, this doesn't create a sustainable process, and we don't want to attach it to any leader or any political party. This belongs to all of us.
Thank you, Donika. I will firstly see if there's also questions from the public. I have more questions, but I think we have to open it up. Yes, I will just kindly ask everyone to introduce yourselves, and if you can please ask questions, not have long comments, just so we can create a space where a lot of people can participate. Yeah, in general. Well, yeah, but just so we have to also.
I have to make a comment,
yes,
because
yes. Okay,
because something that it was shown here was not correct. So that's why I was pushed actually to take the floor and to explain about the process of strategy. So I'm going to switch in Albanian and then going forward. So.
My name is Bakis Firca. I'm coming from Division for Transitional Justice from Ministry of Justice. Allow me, first of all, to speak a little bit about the report very shortly. As much as I was able to read, this report talks about principles, situation, and there are very recommendations that can help us a lot in the process. But what I want to say about the report regarding the part, since I was actor of some of the process in transitional justice in Kosovo, the part where it is took this report about TRC, about the Commission for Truth and Reconciliation, at least in the version in Albanian, it looks like there is impression that process was created it was the purpose was to have the commission. Actually, it was a process to create a foundation of base so that later on to have a commission. Have in mind, it was not established commission, and it was not a process, not even close for establishing commission. It was preparatory group that was responsible for preparing legal base and also the other material and logistic aspect to create this commission for truth and reconciliation. Regarding the strategy, I have to start from one fact. The moment that it was established, specific department in Ministry of Justice, the first task that came out is how to approach this process so that we can make integrated process to be accessible, to make it such that platform to be a platform that integrate all initiatives that have started in Kosovo for transitional justice. And we started to do some research, somehow to debate with actors. And first dilemma that came in front of us and came from civil society, I don't want to mention names here because I want to be correct, but the first dilemma was why we need to have a strategy when, as you said, the professor said, that this process in relation with Kosovo, it depends a lot from the region. And the second issue or second question that was raised, that there is a model that Kosovo have to take into consideration as a base. And during our daily work, we saw that this is impossible. First of all, the United Nations principle says that each country or region have to have unique process that will be adapted to the historical circumstances, political, economic, and society circumstances of that state. In this direction, we have decided to have a strategy and to start with the process. The process was very difficult for many reasons. First of all, there are so many others, but I have to clarify some things because you are talking all the time about strategy. I don't have a question, but only if you have questions. For as long it was mentioned strategy during all the time, I have to give some clarification because some things are not true. That's why, if you allow me, otherwise I can stop. There are some others that would like to, but there is some misinterpretation or misunderstanding. When the process of drafting strategy started 2019, but in 2020, in a progress report for Kosovo, European Commission decided to put as a recommendation in the sentence, where it says that Kosovo have to develop a comprehensive approach for transitional justice. Another issue that I wanted to talk about, it's about the form of how work was organized to draft the strategy. The working group that was proposed, and there are colleagues that were part of this group, it was composed from 27 people. Representatives of institutions and NGOs. Out of 27 people, only 9 took part, and only 4 were active from civil society. All the rest were not active part of the process. So there was no exclusion of civil society, even in this phase or later on phases, as it was concluded in the report or in what Donika said. Another issue that we need to discuss is that the process did go through public consultation. So we had a dilemma how to make this as comprehensive as possible. So we organized public consultation supported by one project that was financed by the Dutch embassy through three organizations, BAX one, Integra, and was NSI. Whole process of consultation was supported from then and other processes that were dealing with strategy. To summarize and conclude, we have had a direct group of interest, 550 people or representative of those group of interests. Let's go to the content of the strategy. Strategy especially there is some critics against it in some fields. I start from the timeline. I don't believe, not just here in Kosovo, but any other document or such a process that have full consensus about the timeline. In principle, the timeline will be defined based on the debate and needs and events that have happened. In our case, when the timeline is like it is now in strategy, it's 89 to 2000. It's to do with the legal, we have a law for the missing people and also recognition status of victims, sexual victims. Another issue, there is just three propositions that were to do with timeline. The one was 89, 2008, and debate was there, but I cannot talk now about debates that happened during the working groups with civil society and victims, because when it was proposed, 89, 2008 timeline, it was discussed about the institutional responsibility regarding what had happened at that time. So in here, there was the dilemmas and discussions. Another issue that was discussed, and the German ambassador mentioned that, it was it's more than 5 minutes. Please summarize, because I had seen lots of people. I'm talking here. Let me just finish. I'm talking about the report, because the report is concluding some of the things that I'm talking about. Issue that is dealing with victim compensation. When it's talked for victims of specialized rooms, quite current now. There are some issues that have been presented in relation to the victims of a tribunal for former Yugoslavia. So when you start and should start in relation with treatment of the victims in process of compensation, which is the third pillar of reparation, either should be comprehensive one and process does not exclude them. Another issue that is politicization, which was mentioned by Donika. In principle and experience of everyone that dealt with this, without political momentum, it's very difficult the process to be successful. So it's true that politicization will damage the process, but without politicians in process, it's impossible for process to go ahead. And the last thing that I want to say, one issue should be raised like this. The question actually, should Kosovo wait to that the negotiation or dialogue to be successful so that the process to continue, or should Kosovo finish the task like homework, do the homework in relation with the past so that the process starts? And in the end, EU does have an instruments to decide, put the region in the pressurize, because the chapter 23 and 24 of ACI, whole process starts and ends with those two chapters. Those two chapters are very important in regional cooperation to treat the past. My name is Agim Blashtiku. I'm a citizen of Kosovo. I would like to ask a question while Ambassador was here, but since Ambassador left, I'm going to ask your this question. I have lived for 10 years in Germany, and I left Germany in 1998, and I came during the war. Now, with this dialogue, that you are repeating for so many years since after the war. If you would have liked to solve dialogue, you would have not sent those men in a Hague. But Albin Kurti, who is prime minister, have said that if you know, I believe you know quite well, you remember that, without apologizing Serbia, no, he will not be sitting in dialogue. I promise to all people in Kosovo that Serbia never will apologize for what they've done in Kosovo. So without them apologizing, we should not any dialogue with them. There is no dialogue, and there is no need to ask for dialogue with Serbia, because I'm going to tell you about another history. My parents, my grandfather, 1912, explained to this German that he came from Toplica when the Serbs chased us from Toplica in Serbia. In 1999, they did the same. They were not, thanks to the God, one, America, two, KLA, three, Serbia should know that they should apologize first. Not to the government, but to the people. But there is no Serbian came to apologize for what they've done, what kind of massacres against women, rape, no dialogue. Dialogue have died. Albin is cheating us. He's cheating people. He cannot cheat us. I would have liked to talk with ambassador. 10 years I lived in Germany. I know quite well German laws. Do you have a question? Any specific question? What do you think? Do you think that there will be a dialogue between Serbia and Kosovo? Do you think that Serbia will apologize? Thank you. Any other question?
I think just what I wanted to highlight is that what I found very interesting that your report mentions is how, due to the fact that there hasn't been a comprehensive national strategy for years, it has also created this kind of a space where this is insistent to think that the dialogue has become the expectation in the public, in the larger narrative, is that we should not engage without there being an apology. And while that, while that is also important, I think we also have to be critical, self-critical, in the sense that we have also failed for years to create and come together around one strategy. So maybe just to add this as well on top of it.
Exactly. I mean, first of all, if the consultation process has been done in such a one way in which the government just sits and tells everybody that they know what they're doing constantly without leaving space for a debate, then, you know, we end up in, you know, such a situation that we are now. People actually complain about it not being inclusive. I am now in the process of drafting a strategy, and I know that it is possible to organize consultation. You can bring thousands of people. You can do online consultation platform, because that's what we do actually. We created the online consultation platform. But you can as well just, you know, like ignore all the comments. So statistically, you do have a process which, you know, you could claim that is inclusive, that it, you know, was done through early consultation phases even, meeting with citizens, public consultation online, and yet exclude everything. Because in all processes, at least in Kosovo, and in a process that I am now part of, it is rarely that process is interactive. It is, in most of the cases, one-sided. So, and also, I think we should all be self-critical. I'm not claiming that one party is better than the other, but accepting constructive criticism is the first step towards success, because you always know that you're doing something that you could do better, and there is always room for improvement. I think, you know, this is what the government should know, that, you know, we are all in this, we are partners in this, and, you know, I cannot keep repeating more the fact that I am actually very happy that we reached the point of having a strategy. This is a step to be, you know, like really congratulated, because we are probably one of the, you know, like a few countries in the region that actually have this document. So I think, you know, like we are in this together, and we don't have to barricade ourselves, you know, and being defensive about, you know, processes that we lead. The second one is that we never said that these issues should be included in the Brussels dialogue. it was actually because, we knew that political elites would use and misuse, the dealing with the past issues for daily political transaction, even elections transaction. We want them to be detached from the dialogue. Dialogue with Serbia is something else. Dealing with the past is another process that, is multi-stakeholder. It includes different pillars.
Fine.
And this is why we actually need to have more inclusive debate everywhere, because we lack platforms in which people can sit and talk about their experience during the war. And, in our recommendation, what we said is that, by engaging genuinely in the dialogue, at least, try not to harm the dealing with the past process, do no harm, actually, in this case. We don't expect that the dialogue with the current framework to actually address, all these issues. We just expect the dialogue to be more genuine and not harm, and create a conducive environment in which we could talk about dealing with the past, and in which we could constructively actually do this together. So, in our recommendation, the dialogue is one of the key problems, and actually detaching from it would be a good way to move forward.
I think there's much to be added to that. I think maybe the one thing, I'm sorry the gentleman had left, but I think apologies come at the end of the dialogue in a certain way. This is part of the dealing with the past, is that, when dialogue happens when things are difficult, and, you wish at any process there are apologies, but again, apologies and acknowledgements come often at an end of a process where you actually are in communication and you realize what one apologizes for, because it doesn't come, it comes often through this dialogue. So I think it's very important that, dialogue is often held between parties where it's difficult. If it's easy, then it's a new chapter, that it's a new process. So again, and we're saying this very much aware that we feel like there is not enough at all willingness to actually confront one's own difficult history, and I've been very critical of the Serbian government in this regard. But I think to make apologies precondition for dialogue, I think, is looking at the process from the wrong way around, and I think this is quite important.
Is there any other question? If not, I have a final question for closing. Or okay, can we just wait? Yes, for the mic, please.
First of all, congratulations, of course, the 25th anniversary. Of course, we speak today, obviously, in the light of an extremely important topic, of course, for Kosovo, and as both speakers basically outlined quite rightfully, basically this is an ongoing process and it will never stop. And this is absolutely I would say nobody, I think, recently phrased it better than you two guys, basically. And what I want really to make a comment, of course, and I was really truly inspired by the gentleman who just left, of course, that we really need something which we advocated for the years already, of course, as a part of the civil society. And this is a social dialogue, actually community social dialogue at a very grassroots level. I've been reiterating this for the past 10 years or so to various levels and so on. And I'm absolutely not really happy, actually, to see ourselves into the position constantly reiterating exactly what is needed. It's quite obvious. It's there. You can't ignore it. If you ignore it, you get actually conflicting opinions, of course, over the same issue. When it comes to this topic, obviously, there is no consensus in Kosovo, and it's not going to be anytime soon, particularly with the strategy, of course, that was adopted by the government, which was full of the criticism, of course, from all over, not really from the Serbian community, but also there is certainly a part of the Kosovo Albanian civil society sector, of course, in the media as well, who pointed out a couple of shortcomings that were obviously evident, of course, that deprives out of the strategy. So my question to you related to that, having in mind that one Kosovo Serb Civil society organizations have participated, organized a number. Mr. Svircha, if I'm not mistaken, yes, have mentioned the NSI, who participated actually in the consultative process, of course, with the Kosovo Serb community, preparing a number of recommendations to the strategy, which were absolutely ignored by the government itself. So what we have in the end, we have actually a strategy that neither side but the government itself, of course, was very satisfied with it. So my question to you, what do you think actually, would it be possible to have the government, somehow being self-criticized and saying, we acknowledge your concerns, we acknowledge the concerns of the international community and the broader public. We should really do something about it in terms of amending the shortcomings, of course, that obviously emerge in the strategy, but they are not really addressed, particularly because they come from the non-majority communities. Or if not, of course, do you think that the strategy actually will remain yet another strategy, of course, without actually a clear sort of, vision how they are going to actually execute it? Thank you.
Well, I mean, there are valid concerns. Obviously, the strategy is freshly adopted, so it is very unlikely for it to be amended almost immediately. I mean, many strategies of the government, not just in the case of Kosovo, you see the flaws and limitations already in the beginning, but, at least they should be a certain number of years to implementation of it in order to see whether it has been working or not. And then, throughout the process, you actually see the flaws. You either wait for the next strategy, which was the case with the strategy that I'm leading, or you intervene immediately to fix, these limitations. So it is up to the government, but, now it's an election year. We will have elections soon. So I don't see political will to immediately intervene in a process that was concluded after so many years. I'm not counting only the last leg of the process, but since early efforts to actually have this strategic document adopted. Now we will see, because there are many things. The presidency has already announced that they are going to work on the Truth Commission, and I think there are processes in which we could actually intervene and provide our inputs and see if they are being taken into consideration or not. And I understand the frustration, but also the difficulty to actually develop a strategic document, multi-stakeholder working group in which, sometimes people miss some sessions and the process can be messy. I fear that, obviously because, not just because of the complexity, but sometimes lacking capacities, that some strategies are already, discouraged to be implemented, or they show the first flaws almost immediately. That will have to be seen. I really hope it's not going to be just one of the strategies that is in the government, it's a good document, a fairly good document, and not being implemented at all. But there will be pressure, because there is, it has steered a lot of debate, and I'm sure that, organizations, the international community working on the topic will be sort of following the process to make sure that it's not having the fate of many strategies that haven't been implemented. So this is all that we can do as civil society at the time being, and never stop, criticizing. Again, criticism is never because we want to target an institution or a political party or a political leader. It's part of the process in always trying to become better than we are and to do better than we are currently doing.
Thank you, Donika. If there's no more questions, I want to pick up for wrapping, a closing question, and Florian, to maybe connect with what Donika was talking about now when she mentioned this phrase about the strategy, whether it's just going to remain in the drawer or actually is going to be pushed forward. But I think we have to also locate the drawer in the now, in 2024, and also look a bit, I think, especially in the political context of the past few years, and how the current political situation might affect whether this strategy gets implemented or not. Because on some ways it feels that we are a bit on a political impasse when it comes to the government's relations with Serb communities in Kosovo, then also with the international community. So could you maybe just comment briefly also on these political dynamics at the moment, what we are now, and this strategy is being set forward? How does it help or actually prevent this strategy from truly moving?
Thanks. I mean, I think the challenge really is, I mean, and I think you alluded to it very well, that for a strategy of dealing with the past, it has to be seen as including also those who are not in government, and also all the institutions as institutions, and not just government members. And I think it's up to the government to do that job. To basically make sure that that others feel included. I mean, I think as Donika said, there's an election, so of course in pre-election times sensitive topics are always difficult. But then after the elections, there will be another term for whoever will be in government at that time to pick up the topic. I mean, I think a successful strategy is one which survives a particular government, and one which has a broader social roots. Now, the circumstances are not very encouraging because, of course, we have this difficulty, as you're saying, the relationship of the current government with the international actors is not always easy. It's often seen as not being in a cooperative relationship, confrontational beyond necessary, and as we mentioned, the dialogue itself is not functional. So there are many blockages which make it more difficult. This could just mean that the strategy will not live, but at the same time, I think it's also the job of others to try to make sure to say, well, let's take this, as Donika was saying, a starting point to work with, and to encourage the government, whoever will be the government in the future and is now, to open up to other actors. I mean, and I mean, we talked also with ambassadors and international representatives. I mean, the overall message was, well, this is good to have a strategy. It's good that it's there, and again, this is a positive development. So I feel like there's a positive atmosphere overall to say, well, this is a good starting point. Let's work with that. And so I think it's then up to the government to use that opportunity and to fill it with life, but the obstacles are obvious, and I think the obstacles will not be caused by the strategy and by the reality of dealing with the past, but there are other obstacles which can make it stumble. So again, it would be good to take this year and to take this 25th anniversary to say, let's not leave it at a strategy, but move into the reality of it, move into the real process. Because again, we all know you can have the great strategy for everything and nothing happens in real life. So it's the test is real life. The test is what is happening on the ground. Whether it is dialogue of communities, whether it is these other processes. If they don't happen, then you can have a wonderful strategy. You can have even a better strategy, and nothing will happen. So the strategy is just a small piece of the puzzle. And if nothing else happens afterwards, then it's meaningless.
I think it has also affected relations between CSOs working in the north with other ones across the country. So how do you see this working out? And then just one last thing, because also the ambassador mentioned this fact, criticized the fact that potentially the strategy is also pushing to establish a unified narrative that excludes some. And I think what today also showed is that there's also not a unified narrative necessarily amongst majorities, like among the majority Albanians. And in this criticism that comes and will come, especially from the international community, do we think that it's also important to also mention that, because as Florian mentioned at the beginning, first we establish facts, but then there's different perspectives and different approaches, and there's also not one unified Kosovo-Albanian narrative either.
Actually, with the Kosovo specialist chambers, we have seen that we lack common narrative about everything in Kosovo. I mean, the parliamentary debates are mainly politicians criticizing each other about their role they played during the war, whether, people were fighting or in the battlefield, or were politically helping or whatever. You could see that there is still a lot of tension, and it has exposed, the specialist chambers have exposed this a lot more, especially, after the process has started in The Hague. And you can see that even the books that were written by people who are there, now are being put into question by the authors themselves, that even that narrative is not common between the author and the book that they have written. It is a lot, that we have to process, and everything, basically impacts the way we see this process. The second one is, the role of civil society and how much, this polarization has impacted the work of civil society, Albanian and Serbs, a lot. I mean, there are tensions, and we have divergent. What we learned in civil society is that we can have our attitude or approach toward a certain process, but we can still work together. This hasn't been easy. We have been, constantly dealing with a lot of challenges. The challenges of stigma. If you try to have a critical approach on both sides, you're automatically, listed as traitor. Targeted online and offline. We have seen this, with, for instance, Shkelzen Malici. And you could see that there is a lot of tension even among us, and let alone when it comes to us and our Serbian colleagues. What we learn from civil society is that we are persistent. We have crises, we have ups and downs, and then we find a way to move forward. And I think this is, the only way that we could actually survive this very complex environment. And the last one is on, daily politics. I mean, elections scare me. And it's not just because of dealing with the past. It's about, politicizing everything. And then, and for half a year, we don't expect anything to happen. Even